of Nigeria. Oh, sorry, I'm told you can't hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Oh, so sorry. I lost communication on my laptop, but I think I'm back on now. So I said I want to apologize for the fact that I lost communication. Dr. Ijeoma has graciously agreed to get us a speaker for today. And at a very short notice, Dr. Akintola has agreed to make this presentation to us. So I want to say a big thank you to you, Dr. Akintola, for deciding to be our guinea pig for today, if you allow me to use that word. In our usual manner, we'll have handed over to the president of this group, Dr. Mobolaji Lawal. But he's asked me to send his apologies that he might not join us early. He will definitely join us before the program is over. So I hand over to our moderator for today, Dr. Ijeoma. You have the floor. Thank you.
I think she's muted.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. Good afternoon once again. I welcome everybody to this August meeting, literally so. It's in August. Thank you, Dr. Wonu Akintola, my sister and my friend, classmates, many things to me. I thank you for taking on this presentation to a really wide audience usually, and recordings will be made, and many more people than even attend will get to hear the presentation. Thank you so very much. Understanding an adolescent, like they say, getting them. They say, you really get me. Understanding or getting an adolescent is actually the first step to being able to reach them, hear them beyond the things that are said and the things that you see. And this is really critical to managing whatever challenges they have brought for you to solve. And so I'm hoping, and I know, that somehow or the other, by the time Dr. Akintola tells us about the influences that shape them, how they develop, and the things that decide what matters to them and probably modulate some of their behavior, we'll be getting to manage our patients a bit more holistically. The aim is to do better than we're already doing. Now, I'm sure everybody will identify with the fact that what we all did and concerned ourselves with as adolescents has changed considerably since we were adolescents. Now, Dr. Akintola and I met when we were adolescents. We are now adults. We've all changed, but different influences have made us different people, but we're still able to interact well. Some children, however, are unable to interact optimally with their society, because of the things that they go through or some developmental problems. So she's going to discuss some of those. So I introduce to you Dr. Wonu Akintola, my sister and my friend. She's a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist, currently working in the UK. and she got her MBBS the same year I did in 1992 in the University of Ibadan, UCH trained up school. So when you are welcome, over to you, I hand over the microphone, the virtual microphone to enjoy.
Thank you very much, EJ. Well, I'll say Dr. Akinwumi for this forum. And I'd like to start by also saying a big thank you to Dr. Eletu. Thank you, sir, for having me. And thank you for all the helping to put all the processes in place to make this happen. So thank you so much. I appreciate your support. It is indeed a vast topic. It's almost like talking about a lifetime of not just one individual in this case, as we may appreciate for any patient we see. And the key word EJ's Dr. Akinwumi has kindly used is the holistic approach. And that's so important. And with mental health, it can be quite challenging because it's a lot easier to appreciate the things we see more than the things we don't see. So we're going to do a bit of deep digging today, or should I say deep diving, really. And I would please ask your permission to follow me on a journey as we go from the early years and to see how this adolescent mind evolves, the things that happen behind the scenes. So the first part of the presentation might feel a bit like, what's she going on about? But please just come along with me on the journey, and we will unravel how things unfold for the adolescent from the early years to the present stage. If we understand the foundation, we will understand how the house works. And also it helps us build better. So the foundation matters. Right, I will share my screen in a minute, and please let me know if you can see it or not. Is my screen showing, please?
Yes,
Yes, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Right.
Yes.
So we're looking at Adolescence Unmasked and the evolution of adolescent mental health. I won't bother introducing myself again because Dr. Akinwumi has kindly done a good job of that. Thank you. I'd like to start with a disclaimer that information given on this platform is solely for educational purposes, and where there are concerns about mental health, please see the appropriate specialist in your area. There are different services in different areas, and it's important that we engage with the right support. Hopefully at the end of this session, we will have a better understanding of adolescent mental health, understand the mental health foundation. Like I said earlier, the foundation matters because what happens over the years is we're trying to build on the foundation. And so early years is important. And my hope also is we will understand the importance of early years, the mask that adolescents may have to put on. And I dare say at this point that even as adults, we all have to put on different masks for different reasons. And with the adolescents, it can be quite challenging. And we want to see behind the mask so we can support them appropriately. I can confidently say everybody here has a connection with an adolescent, be it as a parent or uncle, granduncle, maybe even as a great-grand relative. And at the end of the session, hopefully we'll all be able to work together for a mentally healthier future, not just for the adolescent, but for all of us. Because when things go well with our young people, we're happier and we're all in a better place. So mental health matters for the adolescent. I thought a good starting point was to agree on the definition of mental health. Because if we're asked to define mental health, it may vary. But the WHO has kindly put it together in a concise way. It says a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities. So it's not about someone else's abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life. That means there are stresses that are normal and there are stresses that are not normal, can work productively and fruitfully. We can be very active, we can be producing a lot of things, but it might not be fruitful, and is able to make a contribution to his or her own community. Translating mental health now to adolescent mental health, and this is all about setting this foundation. Adolescent mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual who is transitioning between childhood and adulthood realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Now, if we can imagine as adults that life can be challenging in terms of realizing our own abilities, I mean, whether it's in a job role, if we talk about imposter syndrome, many people will be able to identify with it. Cope with the normal stresses of life. What is normal stress for another person may not be for another. Work productively and fruitfully. Now, this can be challenging for anyone. More so now, for the adolescents, they are now going through this phase of, am I a child or am I an adult? What is expected of me? What do I expect of myself? So if anyone is carrying a burden mentally, an adolescent, I would say they have more to deal with. And it can make it challenging for adults around them, because you might find 1 minute the child is relating to you like a full-grown adult, and they will come up with amazing things, and you think, wow, my child's fully grown. And then it could be the next discussion. You think, what's she talking about? Or what's he talking about? Why is he acting like a child? It's because they're going through that transitioning zone. And they are also struggling with discovering who they are. So two key things, two significant things that young people struggle with is that identity. And the second one is belonging. Where do I belong? And we will look at that a lot more as we go further. So adolescence, the growing up stage, lots of changes, physical changes we may be able to relate to. But what about the changes we do not see? Emotional changes, mental changes, environmental changes, and all of these impact on what's going on in the mind. Because the truth is there is no health without mental health. There's nothing we can do if we're not mentally healthy. So mental health matters. Question people sometimes wonder with adolescence is it an age or a stage? Is it defined by age? Like, oh, is it 10 to 19? Or because the changes are so varied and it happens at different times, when it might be difficult to classify it as an age range, because even like puberty, think about it, some people have precocious puberty. And behind the scenes as well, there's so much that's happening in the brain cells, which may be impacted by diet, by other physical issues. But neuroscientists have recognized that there are key stages where the brain is a lot more, developing a lot faster, where there's a lot more activity happening in terms of neurons being generated and the connections being formed. Now, I thought at this point as well, I was going to ask Dr. Akiwumi, should I pause for questions? I don't know if at any point there are any questions or things in the chat box, so I don't just carry on.
Okay, well, no, I think you should just go ahead, finish the lecture.
Okay, I will carry on.
Yes, you can carry on, and at the end of the lecture, then there will be question and answers. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So we have physical changes. Oh, so it's echoing now. Sorry. Right. So we have physical changes, emotional changes, cognitive changes, social changes. And where does it all start? With the challenges, especially in the last few years, things that were deemed common disorders, the statistics have radically changed since the pandemic. And I don't want to bore you with statistics because, I mean, you can find loads of that, but I can say confidently that no matter what statistics we get, there's still a lot more happening than we may be aware of. Where does it all start? There's no mind without the brain. And brain development starts even before conception, because a mother's health, for instance, will affect the way the brain develops. So when we look at brain cells developing in the first few weeks of pregnancy, and it's reckoned that 50,000 cells are produced per second while in the womb. Till the end of the first year of birth, the cells develop specific functions and connections. So connections are being formed. It's like we said, if we use the analogy of a house, it's like the wiring now being set up. And by the time the baby is born, a baby has 100 billion neurons. An adult is said to have about 86, 85 billion neurons. Something happens between that stage. At 24 weeks of gestation, all the brain cells are developed. And like we said, the brain development begins before birth, continues into adulthood. If we look at the foundations at the different areas of brain functions, we can look at it as the different rooms in that brain house. There are plenty of neurons, not all of them are needed. And it gets to a point where there needs to be a trimming to see what's necessary, what's not. The most sensitive periods of brain development is the 0 to 5 years when the foundation is laid, and 12 to 25 years when the trimming starts. At that 12 to 25 years, roughly, which is that adolescent phase, that's when we look at what are the neurons, which just like the muscles we use or don't use. Okay, this one has not been active, it's trimmed off. This one's been working and it's still being used. So it might be like behaviors, thought processes that are regularly exercised. Those ones are made to stay. And experiences make a world of difference. So we find positive experiences will build stronger brains. And that's where you might find psychologists, neuroscientists talking about the significance of attachment in those early years. A child that knows security, a child that's experienced nurture, who's been kept safe, the way the brain develops will be different from a child who's experienced adversity, maybe born in a war-torn zone, because that's synaptic connection isn't there. So negative experiences affect the way the brain develops, and recognizing that we're looking at the foundation for the adolescent brain, because ultimately that impacts adolescent behavior. The early years matter. So in adolescence, what's recognized as well, there's an increased risk for psychiatric and neurologic disorders. Why? Because that's also a time when there's a lot of brain changes, and what's happening around the child at that point, whether the child is well supported or not well supported, affects the outcomes in terms of what we may see as behaviors and the decisions they make. So the foundation matters. It determines what structure can be sustained. So in those early years, if a child, for instance, has not had the right support, like Dr. Akumi said earlier, if there hasn't been, the health has not been holistically supported in terms of nutrition matters, and that's where physical health matters. Emotional well-being matters. That's where the role of parenting or the carer matters. It determines the kind of brain chemistry, brain connections, and the neurons that are strengthened in that phase of development. The interaction with the child matters. A child that's getting that to and fro response, you're playing with the child, interacting, learns that he is appreciated, builds confidence. So we might see that some things that we may take for granted with a child are the things that then could affect the child's behavior in adulthood. Resilience in stormy seasons. A child who feels sick because of those early years, as they grow up confident, they take healthy risk, not unhealthy risk, because the adolescent brain is a risk-taking brain. They will thrive even where there's hardship. There's a lot of talk now about resilience, and some people will say resilience is bouncing back. Others will tell you actually it is bouncing forward, because things happen, and rather than it setting you back to where you even were before, it makes you stronger. And all this also for the adolescent goes back to those foundational years. And it's important that it is well established before the house is built. One of the things that happen with the brain development is myelination, which begins before the child is born and it ends in the young adulthood. Before, it used to be thought that it was much earlier, it was just in puberty, but now it's recognized that this actually goes on to about the age of 25. And if the myelination is healthy, it increases the speed of impulse traveling, it supports learning, it supports memory. And things like a child then struggling with learning as they go through maybe primary school, you find that it's not as bad, or it's not a challenge as a child who has not had that holistic support. Another thing to put into consideration is synapses. In the first 8 months after birth, synapses are created at a phenomenal rate. 1,000 trillion such connections are recognized to have been created. And these connections between the cells, it continues till about the age of 8 to 10 years. The most sensitive period is 0 to 5, 12 to 25. Now that's that adolescent phase again. Stress and other factors can interfere with this development while the baby is in the womb. And where there is stress, then you could find out that those synaptic connections are not secured. One of the things that may not, well, I guess it's increasingly being appreciated is the impact of environment, and especially prenatally. So you might find a child who's in the womb and there's a lot of violence around, maybe domestic abuse. After the child is born, this might now be a child who's more prone to anxiety, who's constantly hypervigilant because healthy connections have not been made. So there's a need to appreciate brain development when we talk about the adolescent brain. Stronger brains, that to and fro interaction, new experiences, more neural connections. So a child who's exposed to opportunities to be more creative, there are more neural connections, more interactions with people around, going to play sessions, trying different games, reading different books, trying different activities. It's more new experiences, more connections, and the future behavior is then predetermined by all of this. So moving on specifically now to the mental health and adolescence, some of the things we will look at is with our young people, why is this child behaving like this? And sometimes we might dismiss it, oh, just like the father, you're just behaving like my mother, or as a parent, I might say, I just see myself in that child, that's the way I was. The traits or characteristics you were born with that influence how we behave can be seen as temperament. And that determines how we respond to situations. So something might happen and one person is so calm about it, yet another person flares up. Some people might find it easier to adapt to new situations, others may not. The wiring in the brain is part of what determines this. How engaged or distracted a person is, how sensitive a person is. You might find some friends, I mean, we will know that person is just too sensitive. The same thing with adolescents, we see all of these things. These behaviors, I mean, we look at it, the genes affect, contribute to it, the behaviors we see, experiences contribute to it, the environment. So even where a child is maybe genetically predisposed to behave in a certain way, being in a different environment can influence this. And that's another thing where there's a lot of studying on epigenetics. So with the adolescent, we talked earlier on about the changes that then happen with what we can say rough estimate between the 10 to 25 years of age, where all those neurons that were there at birth are now being trimmed, which is a period called pruning. Now, behind the scenes, we don't see these things happening, but that's what's going on in the brain. And the neurons that have not been used regularly, the connections that have not been used regularly are now made redundant. Now, if it's a child, let's look at something like just saying please and thank you, and imagining that is like a connection, or even some cultural norms. The more that is reinforced with a child, the more it becomes reflex, like anything we do. the more we do it, the more it becomes normal behavior. So, and the ones that are not, the behaviors that are not regularly exercised are the ones that don't stay. And this is now a time where it is a child or the young person is the one making their own decisions, or at least getting to that phase of independence. So there's a lot of plasticity in this phase where things can still be remolded, the brain can be retrained, and because the development is still going on to early adulthood. But a key point to realize is at this stage of development, it is the emotional brain that is much more developed than the logical brain. So we may find young people responding emotionally more than logically. You might have moments where there's, I don't want to say more reasonable, but let's say there's more reasoning. And you think, okay, I can get through at this point. But the reason that gap is there is because the emotional brain, the brain develops from what we'll look at as a bottom-up approach. So the brain develops from the bottom to the top. And you find out with the teenager or the adolescent, it's more the emotional brain that is much more developed before the logical brain kicks in, before the development of the logical brain is completed. And that's why adults will process things a lot more logically, because their prefrontal cortex is well developed, which is where all the executive functioning, planning, organizing is. For the adolescents, they're not at that stage yet. Now, some may reach it earlier than others, depending on so many factors, early years, support around, the same way with physical growth. Some reach puberty, some of us will get to puberty earlier than others. So it's making that allowance, giving our adolescents that understanding that, okay, we know this is a challenging time for you. It's a transitional phase, and a lot of things are being emotionally determined rather than reasoning. And that's why we may see some unreasonable behaviors, because the logical brain is not fully developed. So let's please just give that allowance that it's a transitioning phase. And yes, there might be times where we think, oh, these things are going well. Because it's a transitioning phase, please, let's just still make room for that. And also because the brain development or the emotional brain is what they are, that's showing more the behaviors that are emotionally motivated. What we might then see is more of risk-taking behaviors. And the risk one adolescent will take, it might be different from what another one will take, because there are many factors involved, as we said. The stresses that adolescents then experience, of course, for all of us, we look for ways to alleviate our stresses. The things they will resort to cope with stress also will vary. And some will then, maybe they might just experiment with drugs once, and then they find out, actually, this thing gives me respite. And because the logical brain isn't so much, hasn't so much kicked in, that becomes a way of life. And also, because we've talked about early years and the experiences they have had, you have risky sexual behaviors, there's gender confusion because of that sense of belonging. Who am I? Where do I belong? Gender issues come in as well. And also, this is not, I mean, the sexual behavior, the risk-taking behavior, the gender confusion, all these concerns is not made better by the world itself being concerned. So young people are now exposed to so much information. What do they believe? What should they believe? So if we find adolescents challenging in our days, now that we're adults, can we imagine what it is like for young people today? Social media is saying yes to this, no to the same thing. Adults are under a lot of stress. So the security, safety, and nurture they need, the answers they need, where do they get it from? Who can they rely on? And you try some things and you actually feel, okay, it feels good. And the world is also promoting lots of feelings. Go by your feelings. And so it is a confusing time for the brain that is not fully developed. So it's not just about what's happening around us, it's how the brain copes. A healthily developed brain will cope better with stresses, and it's still challenging. And other issues we have now is violence. What are they exposed to? Crime, and unfortunately, death. This is just talking about, we mentioned about pruning. Inactive axons are, cut off. Those are the weaker synapses. The ones that are strong stay. So it's about strengthening healthy relationships, strengthening positive experiences, whether it's engaging in extracurricular activities that's helping them build confidence. Those things help the brain and help build resilience. Ultimately, what young people are looking forward to, and what we hope for as well, is for young people who are independent, who are able to cope with normal stresses of life and make a contribution to their own society. And we all have a role. We want them to realize their own abilities, work productively and fruitfully, and make their own contributions. So a lot of times what we will look at is behaviors. Those are usually what's concerning. And that's why I thought it would be good to look behind the scenes to see how the brain develops and the need for healthy brain development in coping with the inevitable stresses that will come the way of our adolescents. What are the current day stresses? Moment, there's bullying. It's not just physical bullying, there's cyberbullying, there's difficulty with schoolwork, expectations from others, expectations from parents. And if we're not realistic about the challenges that young people are going through, our expectations can be unrealistic. And I'd like to take us again back to that WHO definition of mental health. It's about realizing his or her own abilities, everybody realizing their unique abilities, because if we're expecting lemons from an orange tree, it would be unfair. Unfortunately, young people are sometimes put under this pressure, not appreciating the fact that a child may have maybe a learning difficulty in an area, and this may have been missed for years. The child then gets to secondary school and says, why can't you do this? It's additional pressure. There are all other issues, chronic illnesses, children who witness domestic abuse, home stressors, harsh parenting, and the challenge of the transitioning from childhood to adolescence itself, to adulthood itself, is difficult, it's stressful. And they may be able to cope with it, maybe if there weren't other stressors. Sometimes all you need is one more drop to make that cup run over. So it's important that as professionals, as parents, carers, relatives, we're mindful of the stressors that young people are exposed to and appreciate the fact that the brain is at a vulnerable stage of development and they need the right support. Now, this isn't condoning the fact that, that means they should get away with everything. Part of support is healthy support, that where there's a need to discipline appropriately. And also recognizing that sometimes children may be finding certain things challenging. So if we see a behavior that's odd, I think it's definitely important to help the child engage with professional support. I've met children where they're in secondary school and you think, for goodness sake, how did no one pick up that this child had autism? And it's now at a point where things are difficult, challenging for the parents. Maybe they're now walking on eggshells in the house because the child has not even been able to understand himself and is now at that adolescence phase. So please, let's see this as adolescent mental health is everyone's business. Sometimes people wonder, is it puberty? Is it hormonal changes? Because it's also a phase where there are changes in the hormones, yes. Is it mental illness? Is it mental disorder? Is it the environment? Is it just this child navigating adolescence and because of the other challenges going on in the house? Is it developmental conditions? If there is any uncertainty, please let's get help. So people who are experienced with it can exploit. And it's also about everyone working together. So whilst there's attention being paid to the physical health, to the mental health, to parenting, support for parenting, all of that coming together helps us to appreciate and support the needs of adolescents. Some of the things the adolescent phase that they then have to navigate: abstract thinking, reasoning, problem solving, and how can we empower them with that? It's not just about studying, it's about a holistic approach, what they engage in, of course, physical health, food, rest, exercise, extracurricular activities, reasoning with them, games. If we remember that the more activities and the wider the variety of activities they engage in, the more neuronal connections they make, we will then be supporting that brain that we can't see the neurons, but we are helping those neurons develop. And you find out that then the thinking is faster. So things like, for parents, for instance, telling off, we could try reasoning. And sometimes it might be challenging reasoning with them, because the part of the adolescence phase, they know it, they know the answer, because of course they feel like an adult. So bearing those in mind will help us not be cross when they kind of want to assert themselves. And it will then be easier to, rather than get in the debate, ask questions. So I'm talking to us, please, as professionals, at the same time, parents, at the same time, recognizing that adolescent mental health is everyone's business. The challenge is, who am I? Am I a child or an adult? What do I do next with my life? Even adults struggle with that. Am I taking on a new job? Should I go to uni, but I really don't want to? Or they start uni and you come for graduation, you find that the child actually you realize the child actually hadn't been in school for 2 years. Parents are living abroad. These are things that we've seen. Where do I belong? And because of this sense of belonging, another challenge is finding gangs. And at that point, it's important to kind of encourage parents, let's make home a safe place. I've heard young people tell me, that they're in gangs and say, those group of people, they're my family because home is hot. What am I good at? Recognizing their giftings and their talents, not necessarily academic, and it may be academic. So if whatever their giftings are, helping them with that. Significant thing to bear in mind is adverse childhood experience and the way it then unfolds through the ages. So children, for instance, who witness domestic abuse, or maybe a parent with mental health difficulties, or parents who are incarcerated, it's recognized that these also, like we said earlier, looking at that brain in its early phases, it has an impact on neuronal connections. And you then have disrupted neuronal development. Of course, if the brain isn't as developed, what happens to social interactions, emotional interactions? What happens to learning? So we might see, before us, we might see someone who looks, 13, and they'll tell you, the reading age or the things he's able to do is at a much lower age in different areas. Why is that? Something has disrupted those neurons. And if that continues, so if you imagine a child who is then struggling with learning in school and then moves on to secondary school, now the foundation is not able to sustain the building that's getting higher. We're putting more things on the foundation that is already weak. So stress comes in, and this is not normal stress, because healthy stress helps us to stretch and develop. So what we find here now is the child feels, I can't cope, I can't carry on, and the weight is too much to bear. What do? Look for things that will make them feel better. Unfortunately, this may now be unhealthy, risky behavior, drugs. From there, what do we get? More disabling behaviors, social problems, and unfortunately, sometimes early death. So that's one of the things. If we look at the ACE studies, Adverse Childhood Experience Study, it's worth checking. It's on the CDC, it's on the internet. It shows us the impact of this early adverse experiences on the developing brain and ultimately on those adolescent years. And it's one of the things that then you will find can result in early death. Not just early death, even physical health being impacted. If physical diseases, diabetes, because stress, of course, as we recognize, disrupts physical health. So right from conception, it's important to bear in mind the importance of adverse experiences on the child, on physical health, and ultimately on mental health as well. So guiding children into being responsible, fulfilled, independent adults that reach their optimal, unique potential is one of the things that of the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, I'll say by default, I think that's the goal 3. And adolescent mental health is a key part of this. Sources of identity for young people, role in the family, celebrity and sports stars, community responsibility, status symbol. There's so much around them at the moment that threatens their well-being, and hence the need for us to be mindful of a holistic approach, not just for their physical health, but also their mental health. And bearing in mind that this is a critical stage where there's so much going on in the brain, they need us to understand and appreciate what they're going through and support them appropriately through those stages of development. So I'd say thank you at this point, and I will pause for question. It's been a quick run through, and I'll just stop sharing my slides.
Right. Thank you very much, Wanu, for your insights from the vantage point of experiencing these children day to day in your practice. For many of us, there's a big rush because our patients are so many. They come when there's a problem. There's very little room for prevention and all these supporting them before the crisis time actually starts. So we're going to open the floor for questions that you would answer. If you please note them down. So basically, we've learned that adolescence is one of the transitioning periods in a child's life, and brain development is most critical between 0 and 5 and 12 and 25, which includes adolescence, and that these events influence the brain development environment and various things happening, giving either a positive experience from the beginning, from conception through to adulthood. And many of these things, along with the environment, predetermine behavior, but they can also, the brain can also be retrained because it has plasticity.
Absolutely.
So in trying to make sure that we give holistic care, it becomes everybody's business, because as pediatricians, for instance, we're going to need to identify children who need support and work together with a team, an appropriate team, to meet their needs and address the challenges. So do we have any questions? As you have seen, I was hearing gender identity. In fact, I believe some of us saw a video last week or the week before. A woman said her child was identifying as a cat and she had a right to, and she was going to support him. So there are many things that we're not very conversant with around here that are gradually inching their way into our country, whether or not we like it. We are modernizing and westernizing day after day. Please raise your hand so that you can ask your question. I see Pan President's hand is up. Please go ahead with your questions.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Dr. and everybody. And thank you very much for your beautiful presentation, Dr. Akintola. I have maybe about, I think, 2 or 3 questions. I hope that I remember them. The first one, I mean, bear in mind the significance of, should I say brain, I should call it brain damage that occurs because of some of the things that you mentioned, harsh parenting and other things like that. I'm just wondering, is there any way back after adolescent in terms of, I don't want to take cure, or is there any way back to try to improving the situation of things in a child that has suffered some mental problems during adolescence? Secondly, I'm sure there are a lot of youths out there in Nigeria that are not even maybe connected to any healthcare, not talk of mental care in Nigeria. And they are going to be very important factors when they become adults, either by way of a negative contribution to the development of the country. So is there any way that one can actually promote widespread preventive measures? Take, for instance, I was talking to somebody some few days ago about the need to establish maybe a school of parenting, because I believe that raising children is a very serious business. And therefore, parents or potential parents should be trained somehow. Is this a possibility? Is there any way of encouraging this kind of line of thinking that people that want to become parents will have some sort of training, bearing in mind the significance of healthy development of the young ones?
Yeah.
So thank you very much. I hope I got my questions out clearly.
Definitely. Thank you very much, sir. They're great questions. And honestly, these are some of the scenarios. Sorry, Ije, were you going to say something?
Yes, I was just going to ask, would you like to wait and get all the questions, or you want to answer them as they're coming up? Because some people will put their questions in the chat as well.
Okay. Should I do this and then we carry on with, as you lead me?
Yes, that's fine.
I'll go
that's
with
fine.
you. Okay.
Okay,
So,
just go ahead with this one. But please, just an announcement. If anyone has questions, if you would like to voice it, that's fine. But if it's short, you might want to put it in the chat and it also will be considered. Thank you. Please go on, Ronnie.
Right. So thank you, sir. I mean, the questions are fantastic. And it's one of the things that we often encounter in practice at work. The first one you mentioned was about improvement, where a child has suffered significant adverse experiences. Things that have been lacking in those scenarios has been security, safety, nurture. And there's been a lot of stress. As we recognize, the stress hormone producing a lot of cortisol, as I explained in the brain development, it disrupts those connections. Now, practically speaking, and that also brings some of the children I've seen to mind, where in fact, one particular, I think they were brothers, were talking about their food in the clinic, and they said at least it's better than when they used to eat on the floor. And what used to happen then was their mom used to she had no time for them. It was gross neglect. And when she bothered to feed them, she would just put the food on the floor. These children literally grew up like animals, and they'd have to rush for the food, and she wasn't there for them. So by the time they took them away and put them with another relative who was more caring, who gave them time, one could see the difference even in their learning in the school setting. So it's putting it this way, the brain doesn't know the difference between real stress and imagined stress. And if a child is in an environment where they feel unsafe, they will constantly be alert. They cannot pay attention to learning. And even after they've been removed, it takes a while to then build that confidence that now I am safe. So it's like somebody who's being chased by a lion. Even after the lion has gone, you're still out of breath. And that's the kind of thing that's happening in this children's brain. So yes, changing the environment, putting them in a safe, secure, and nurturing environment for a reasonable period of time, as best as possible, continuous period of time, because another issue that then happens is the children's environment keep changing. And what that tells the brain is you're going to move again, you're not safe, you're not safe. So that consistency, which is more what the security offers, it helps. Changing the abusive environment helps to as it were, rewire the brain. The second question you mentioned about widespread preventive measures. Honestly, that is my dream. And I know lots of people hope for that in Nigeria, that we have adults now who've had horrible experiences as children. I think about some of the area boys, and I wonder if they had a different background, what could they be contributing to society? So their mental health has been disrupted at early years, and they're now struggling. And I always think there's a saying that says people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. In spite of what's happened to them, if they could be helped to see that people really care about them, that they belong, it might be their own community doing things, given a feeling, a sense of significance, a reason to be significant and contribute, that could be a significant change. Yes, we may not be able to help all, because some people would have resigned themselves that this is their life because of the extent of the trauma that they've encountered. But people's lives can still be changed, and that applies to putting those the people on the streets that we might feel that, you know, they've had really harsh experiences. So I'm hoping I'm getting the questions right. We talked about preventive measures. Yes. Part of the preventive measures is also recognizing children who may be struggling in school. There might not be enough resources to meet their needs. I remember recently we were looking for an occupational therapist in Nigeria for a child who had writing difficulties. It felt like I was asking for something ridiculous, you know. Now, if the child is not able to excel in one area, what about finding something the child is good at and helping the child see that you've got skills here? It will build self-worth. So those are preventive measures we can put in place, just helping people to see that we may not all fit into this classroom setting, but you can still do something good that makes a difference. And some of the things we might say are the people I keep seeing social media postings and videos, people doing dramatic things. I think there was a recent one, EJ, where the guy was making electric cars, powering cars with electricity. So people have skills. It may not be realized in the school setting, but if we can create avenues or forums where those skills can be developed, yes, we will be preventing a lot of damage to people's mental health. And the last thing, school of parenting, definitely. And I mean, here, churches do it, many religious organizations do it, independent people, NGOs do that. So that can definitely be done. And when parents are educated, they can support their children. But also, it's still that challenge, I would say. Somebody who has not eaten, at that point in time, they may not be thinking about going for parenting class. That's the least of their problem. So the economic hardship and supporting people through those processes, maybe things like food banks, but there are all kinds of issues to consider in that context. And I think that's actually a whole discussion in itself. But definitely, where it is possible, parenting classes can be set up, and that would help prevention rather than cure. I hope that answered your question, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have 3 other hands up. I'll start with Professor Grinjma. Thank you for taking out time to come. I really don't know which hands went up first, but please indulge me. I'd like to call Professor Adinke Grinj first. Thank you, ma'am. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I know my hand did not go up first, but I will accept the honor.
All right.
Thanks very much. Dr. Akintola, that was a brilliant presentation, although I was rather late. So one of my questions may have been answered. If so, I just want a confirmation. Some of these children who exhibit abnormal, well, I don't know whether you call them abnormal, relationships with parents or whatever, they actually take to the social media more. Some of them get addicted to gaming and all that. And I just wonder, whether what comes first. Is it the trauma or the fact that they have the facility at their disposal to do this gaming? Well, at least gaming may not be as harmful as drug addiction, but I need to hear from you about that. Secondly, following on our president's comments, the fact that children, again, who are traumatized may become touts, etc. Have you thought about some of them becoming leaders, and some of them actually are politicians? Because some of them exhibit terrible behavior, like they are totally addicted to amassing wealth. That is an addiction. So some of these things we need to look at, and in trying to make corrections in the society, we may be able to refer them to problems of their childhood and let them know that what they're doing is abnormal. So, I mean, I'm very serious about this. Doctor, please make some comments on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma. These are deep questions, but definitely very, very relevant to our present day. And I'm hoping I'm getting it. The first one, I just want to make sure I'm getting the questions right. In terms of trauma and gaming, it's a complex thing at the moment. I would say even here in UK, one of the things that's happening is children being violent when being told to leave their games. And you hear things like the police had to be called in because the child was going to trash the house down just because they said no gaming. Now, it's always looking at the whole picture in context. There are many factors involved. And one thing I've been appreciative of and so thankful for actually is my medical training in terms of history taking. It's really made me appreciate looking into details with a good history on unraveling so many things. Sometimes there are other issues. Recently I did an assessment where a child, before the child was born, there'd been bereavement in the house where the mother lost a child, wasn't going to talk about the child who looked like him. The dad had a brain tumor. The dad is still unwell. And all of this going on. So this child is in a home where there is nothing, no connection, no communication. When he gets back from school, the only thing he can do is just go on the computer, which is okay with the mom because the dad is very unwell in the house and she doesn't have that time. So what was put across to me then was, oh, does this child have ASD because he's so obsessed with the gaming and that's what he's doing all the time? No, the child did not have. From the assessment we did, it was more because that was the only form of respite he had because nobody was available to talk to him. And I said, in as much as this still remains unaddressed, we're still going to carry on with the problem. So it's always difficult to differentiate whether it's the trauma that's causing the behaviors or the behaviors that's causing the trauma, unless one gets a wider picture in each case. So the full history always helps. And sometimes there might be some holding back, which as one then takes a comprehensive history, you might say this doesn't add up, and that will prompt, it will help to elicit other responses that gives a full picture. Now, even where it's been the trauma that's then making the child resort to that as a coping strategy, it's important to then help find healthier means. I know a family where what they then do is they plan days out and they say at least when they're outside riding bicycle together as a family, it's less time on the screen. So they use it as a strategy to cut down screen time. So really briefly on that, it's getting that whole picture in each case. And then Ma, you mentioned about the touts. Oh, sorry, the people, for instance, who amass wealth. You are so right, Ma. That's unfortunately, and I cannot speak for all cases. A lot of adult behavior definitely starts with early years. There's a psychologist who talks about broken children, grown-up pain. And some of this amassing wealth behavior is more like an unhealthy coping strategy. You feel that when I get that, I will feel better. When I find it syndrome. And then no matter how much they get, it's still not touching the problem. And then it becomes really, I think it should be safely classified under addiction. And for that, I fully agree. People need help. But they can't be helped when they don't recognize that they need help. Exactly. Wi-Fi syndrome. I already put Wi-Fi syndrome. I wrote a blog on that a while back. Wi-Fi syndrome, when I find it syndrome. When I find this, when I find that, when I find it, when I find that, and then it's never enough because physical things will not satisfy those emotions. Yeah. But until the person is aware that they have a problem, even if someone has cancer and they refuse treatment, what can we do? So the awareness, and as we keep talking about this, hopefully people will start waking up to see that for me to behave like this, there's something mentally wrong. So I would implore us to please keep the conversation going. And thank you, Ma, for highlighting this.
Insatiable appetite.
It is. And they're not happy regardless.
Not happy.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
It's a cancer.
All right. Thank you. I have Dr. Agatha and Dr. Bridget Okoegwali. I'm not sure who put up their hands first, but the first one is the A before the B. So Dr. Agatha, please go ahead. And after the two of them, we'll take people who have put their questions on the chat.
Thank you very much, Ijala, and thank you so much, Dr. Akintola, for such a wonderful presentation. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
My name is Dr. Agatha David. So my question, I'm very glad that you told us that this adolescence is a period of gender confusion. And so because we are borrowing a lot of things from the West into our country, into our culture, gender affirming care for adolescents who think they're another gender from what they are born with, starting very early in adolescence. What are your thoughts about it? This is happening in the West, especially in the US. Children as young as 11, as 12 are saying that they're not boys, they want to be girls. And pediatricians are forced, to attend to them because the law allows it. But we have heard now that adolescence is a period of plasticity. It's a period where a lot of things are changing. And so it's very difficult to say that if an 11-year-old girl who feels she's a boy would actually want to be a boy all through her life. So I want to get your thoughts on this.
Okay. Yeah, it's unfortunately, EJ is laughing away. It's a very sensitive topic, and the most important thing is to be objective and to be truthful. So I don't think it's a time, sometimes people put their own personal views, but the most important is to be honest and to tell the truth. What's the difference between gender and the child's sex? Gender is what they think. Meanwhile, the sex is the biology. Does your biology change because you think this way? Or if I think I'm a goat, how does that make me a goat? I can think anything. I mean, like some people who put it on social media, I think I'm a millionaire. It doesn't put money in my pocket immediately. I need to do the right things. So it's helping children, and because it's a very emotional state, it's helping children realize, you know what, your feelings are not you. Sometimes children tell me in clinic, they say, oh, I feel like rubbish. And I say, you know what, where does rubbish belong? It belongs in the trash can. And that's not where you are, because if you were, then you'd be there. So feelings can be misleading. And having those rational conversations help. Yes, there are many voices that are speaking into children's lives in school, on social media. And I'd say for the children in our own network, the most important thing is to love them, to show that you care about them. And they say people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And they might become, because teenagers have all the answers sometimes or many times, they may become argumentative. Honestly, at those points, that's not the time to argue. It's more important to listen to them, listen. And I'm still learning that myself, And we will continue to learn that. It's to listen and then process it. And then when you have an objective thing to place on ground, you place it there and also ask questions. Giving them information is not as powerful. That's what I found, as asking questions. I was talking to a girl in clinic once. She said she knows that if she changes her gender, then she will be happy. She wanted to go to the gender clinic. I said, well, what if you change and you're still depressed? Because there were many reasons that were happening in her life that was, accountable for the depression. She says she knows. And I thought, no, this is not the time to debate this. That's feelings, but it's just important to help them appreciate feelings can be misleading. And there was a time you felt this way and it's past. Does that define you? Asking questions and walking them through. But most important is to let them know we care. And then we can have a conversation at the right time. The timing is also important. Because our battle is not against our children. Our battle is against the voices that are speaking lies and speaking all kinds of things. And those voices are bound, not just with gender, with many things. Why are there sites on social media teaching children how to, lose weight to the point of death, and their website like that? So showing children we care is so much more important. And then, there's another psychologist who talks about you relate before you reason. When there's a relationship, you can reason with the child. Where there's no relationship, and that's why children don't talk to just anybody. It's somebody they built a relationship with. So let's focus on the relationship. That's what matters most. And then from there, we can pour in the right things, not necessarily our own beliefs, the right things.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, it was.
EJ, I'm with you. I'm in your hands. Oh. You're muted.
I'm sorry. I was hoping that Dr. Bridget Okwagale would please go ahead and ask the question.
Okay, thank you very much. I was waiting for you to call me. That's why I've not spoken.
I'm sorry, I was muted.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your beautiful presentation. In fact, you really opened it up for us. I was just thinking that you mentioned, while you were speaking, at the same time, you were talking about prevention and how everything is. I had thought that you should have highlighted the prevention on the slide of its own, either one or two slides, to group them together, because in most cases, for example, talking about the brain development, starting from the mother, so talking to the mother, knowing what she's going to go through, how she should be and everything, because it will affect her child, is also a method of prevention. Absolutely. So if we had had a slide or two talking about these preventive measures, you mentioned a lot, they were all in your presentation, but fortunately they're not written down, and you just talked about them. So that anybody that can have privilege to read the slide, we also know that these are the things we should do, these things up to the time when the child is totally out of order and would need even a psychiatrist, up to medical prevention. So I thought I should just mention it, summarize all this for prevention into a slide or two, so that we can go home with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's very, very helpful. I appreciate your feedback. Thank you very much. And you're so right. There's so many things we could do differently. I remember when I did my youth service in the East, and then we start local government. I remember the women there who would refuse to eat meat. Refused to eat all the things we were encouraging them to eat, so that the child would be well nourished and they would be healthy through pregnancy. For them, it was a taboo, one. And secondly, what they said was, if they eat well, the baby will be healthy, it will be big. And they didn't want to have a big baby. So already, can you imagine, before the baby is born, you're actually setting up the child for challenges. Because they were actually aiming for small babies, so they would have the babies with ease. So yes, that awareness, thank you. And like you said, also agree, prevention better than cure, and looking at the different things we can do at every stage. So I appreciate that, and I will put it together. I'll make it my homework.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're Welcome.
All right, thank you, Dr. Akintola. Okay, so unfortunately, I'm not sure who is doctor, who is professor, who is chief, or whatever the title might be. So I'm just going to read what appears on the top of each person's name. Busayo Babatunde would like to know, with the science behind brain development through the ages and stages, can the medical community speak out more on gender change and transgender issues besieging the world at the moment?
Well, some people are speaking. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think you already touched on that.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the answer to one other question. So if you want to say anything further on it, that's fine.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to say some people are speaking, but people are also being careful because the law varies from country to country. Where there's a risk of, getting into trouble and the police seizing your license, people are careful to speak. So people are speaking, and I would say for all of us, where we find people speaking or things being shared that's relevant to the well-being of our young people, let's keep sharing it. And if we could go home with one thing, the adolescent mental health is everybody's business and nothing we do is too small. So anything we see that's going to be helpful, whether it's parenting resources, please, let's keep sharing it. And I've just put two things in the chat box, the Brain Story by University of Alberta and Developing Child, Center for Developing Child, the Harvard Center for Developing Child. I think there are two links that everyone will find definitely very helpful. The Brain Story is actually a certification program and it's free.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Ni Adetoki, wow, who happens to be one of our classmates, would like for you, Wanu, to please comment regarding the issue of adolescents with intellectual abilities. How can we support them at this stage of their development, especially with respect to their special needs?
That is,
I think the resources are different in the UK than they are in Nigeria. Yeah.
Definitely. And I would say, where the resources are limited, the first thing to start with anything is awareness. If people don't recognize that this child has an intellectual disability, they're not going to engage with the right help. And that's where you might find scenarios where a child is being locked up or put in the village with the grandmother or locked up in a religious institution because they don't want the child is seen as an embarrassment rather than a human being of value that needs to have the appropriate support, and with the right support will fulfill their potential. Hello. So the awareness is the most, for me, and indeed with anything, awareness is the most important thing, and educating people. Dr. Adejoke, I don't know if that answers your question.
Dr. Adetoki, did you dash us the question and dash off? Are you still there? Are you satisfied? Oh, yeah. Okay, if we don't hear from you, we are.
The microphone is the network here is very bad, but thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Come on. So recognition is key.
But we can hear you.
What's the bag?
We can't hear you so well.
The network here is really poor.
He said his network is really poor.
Yes. Okay. So if you can put in the chat whether you are satisfied or not, and we'll continue so we can save time. We've basically exceeded 4 p.m. already. Dr. Orode Dati says that she's an advocate of ongoing anticipatory guidance for mothers to ensure they are raising that these things don't come to a surprise to them, from potty training at age 6 months, flogging toddlers for not finishing their food and not understanding that it's not okay for the child's development. So I think that's a contribution rather than a question.
If I may quickly just say thank you to Dr. Doherty. I haven't seen her in years, but if it's the same Dr. Doherty, we were in school together.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers all the questions that I have seen. If I've missed any, please raise your hand and ask your question before Dr. Eletu yanks all of us up, the mic away from all of us. Okay, so you have a hello from Dr. Duarte.
Yeah.
Right. I believe, Dr. Eletu, sir, I believe that we are going to get a recording of this presentation, and people can take their time to listen to it from the beginning and to the end. And if Dr. Akintola would not mind, could you leave some kind of, how do I put it now? Something by which they can reach you if they have further questions after they've gone through the presentation again. Is that doable?
That's fine. That's definitely
Okay.
fine. I'll put my email. That's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So basically, it's we've had a very lucid presentation that has given us a better understanding. Am I interrupting someone who would like to speak? Right, if you kindly mute yourself, please, if you're not about to speak. Right, so I was saying that we have heard this very lucid presentation from Dr. Wonu Akintola, who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist, trained in our noble institutions here in Nigeria. And then we seem to have gifted her to the people over there, and she's really meeting needs. And she's very busy with this. She's quite well-versed in this. If you have further questions after now, please go ahead and get in touch with her. She's very warm and friendly, honest at every single interaction you have with her, and she's good people. So we've basically learned that understanding the adolescents is key to helping them, and that the things that make dysfunctional adults and adolescents is starts very early, even before we are aware of the fact probably that there's a child growing from conception all the way in through the critical periods of 0 to 5 and 12 to 25. And we also find that environmental influences, as well as physical things, illnesses, parenting even, have a great and critical role to play in how an adult turns out and how an adolescent lives. And so special consideration is required to make sure that they are supported holistically. And she's given us various ways in different circumstances. I dare say that some of these things would never have straight answers, but it's to forge on and continue to work. Thank you very much, Dr. Wonu Akintola, for sparing the time, for taking up this presentation at short notice, and for doing it justice. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for having
Dr.
me. Thank you, everyone.
Over to you, Dr. Eletu.
Thank you very, very much, Ijoma. And I want to say a big thank you to Wonu. I actually just sat back and was listening attentively. Let me first thank Wonu, especially for accepting to make this presentation at short notice. And as a fellow psychiatrist, let me use that word, because I started my residency in psychiatry and I ran away. I think you've done a fantastic job. And we've all learned, and I'm sure the way we relate to even our teens will change from now, basically from what we've learned from you today. So a big thank you. And as I always say, I will knock on your door again.
Please
at some
do.
point for another presentation. Thank you so much. And Ijoma, thank you very, very much for getting Wonu for us to make this presentation. I know today is not the day, you are supposed to be in clinic today, but you decided to take time off to anchor this presentation. A big thank you. And to everybody that has logged in and asked questions and contributed one way or the other, I say a very big thank you to you. And we shall meet again next month, last Thursday, 3 p.m. And this time around, I will not divulge the name of the presenter, don't worry. But you're going to have an exciting time as well. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.